Hello and welcome to Solutions. My name's EILEEN Preston. Solutions is a show about challenges that our local community faces and some of the organizations and people who are working to solve some of those problems. And the problem we're discussing today is not just a local problem. It's a national problem and it's a very big problem. It's a problem so concerning that the Cape Cod Times has done a series on it, a three-part editorial series. And in it they say, dysfunction, partisan gridlock, and incivility in Washington are worse today than in any time since the Civil War. If we keep accelerating on this trajectory, we will witness the collapse of our democratic institutions. So with that dire warning, enter my guest today, Susan Clark. Susan Clark is a writer, a community facilitator. She works on sustainability. She's made it her life's work to work on this. She's gotten an award from an Enduring Democracy Award from the Secretary of State in Vermont. And she's also the town moderator in Middlesex, Vermont. And she's written a book, Slow Democracy, the rebuilding of our community and bringing our decision-making home. Susan Clark, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Ellie.
Nice to have you here. I hope you can talk to us about slow democracy. First of all, the actual term slow democracy, what is it?
Sure, yeah. Well, we define slow democracy as local, that more democratic decisions should be brought to the local level, and that the processes should have three qualities. So I'm going to throw three pieces of jargon at your viewers, and then we'll be done with the jargon. The first one is inclusion. We really need to have democratic processes, not just where we're represented, but where we really get to be involved. Actually, each of us can participate if we choose. The second, deliberative. And that doesn't just mean talking. We define deliberation quite rigorously. We really mean that we are gathering good, solid information, and that together we're weighing options. And it's not just let's debate A versus B. Let's co-create C. That's what a deliberative process does. And the third one, power. Empowerment is really, really important, that we not just have decisions our public discussions be advisory. We really, as participants, as citizens, need to see a clear link to the change that happens. Doesn't mean everybody gets to win and gets their way, but we see what happens when we get involved. And we don't get to pick and choose. We really need all three together. There's a magic stardust that studies are showing that combined, these three qualities help us to slow down a little, and that helps us become less polarized and more productive.
So how does slow democracy help us with the tribalism, sort of the angry rhetoric that we see in our government? And I want to make sure I say our government, because your book makes the point that we shouldn't say the government as if the government is doing something to us, but that we are the government. So how do we work on that angry rhetoric we see from neighbor to neighbor?
It's true, and in a democracy, it's a we. Our government is a we. It needs to be a we and not a they. But there's now solid brain science that helps us understand this. And there was a study that was done, I think the first time in 2006, but it's been repeated many times since then. It's very, very solid, where researchers wired up voters with the brain scans, self-described Republicans and Democrats, and they subjected them to unflattering information about their own party's candidates. Now, according to their MRIs, this is really interesting, when people received new information that contradicted their opinions, their brains actually underprocessed the information. And remember, this is both Republicans and Democrats. So the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for conscious reasoning, hardly even fired. And instead what happened was the emotional centers of their brains lit up. So basically, participants' brains used emotion to ignore new information that they didn't want to hear, but that they couldn't discount intellectually. So we need to remember that this is a physiological reaction. It's closed-mindedness that probably was an advantage to us back in the day when we had to band together in tribes for protection, the us-them mentality. It's really not helpful today when we need all of our best minds working together to examine information critically and find solutions. So what brain science does tell us, though, this is the hopeful bit, that we can use our intellectual capacities better if we don't trigger that us, them, fight or flight response. So we need techniques to frame issues and engage people in less polarizing ways so that we can bring people out of their corners and find the way forward together. And that's slow democracy.
So slow democracy, the whole book actually talks about something, it mentions wicked problems. What is a wicked problem, and why is slow democracy particularly good at handling that?
Yeah, wicked problems. It's such a great term, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it.
Many of today's topics, things like climate change or race, immigration, these are so complex that they're what analysts call wicked problems. There's no simple one right answer. And it's partly because there are competing underlying values, and they're real values. I mean, a simple example for me is citing windmills. That's a wicked problem for me personally, because on the one hand, I want to support alternative energy, but on the other hand, I want to protect our beautiful ridge lines. So it's kind of the good guys versus the good guys. It's difficult. It's going to be a case-by-case basis. How can we do this together? There's a professor in Colorado, Martin Carcassonne at Colorado State, who explains that most problem-solving models that we use today use one of two methods. They either use expertise or activism. So those are two tools wicked problems don't respond to. They're inherently different. They don't respond to sort of expert technical solutions, just throw in a bunch of experts and we'll figure it out. And they don't respond to the activism and political deal making. What they do respond to is slow, trusting, face-to-face, long-term communication. Solutions begin when we recognize that with wicked problems, it's the problem that's wicked and not the people.
That's great. So when we're thinking about these wicked problems, and the book is, I loved your book, it had just so many examples of how people were using these methods in big cities as well as small towns and little hamlets. But I particularly liked a story you brought up about our neighbors to the north. They were dealing with a wicked problem. It was student redistribution and school busing. I can't think of anything that could get more heated and divisive than that. So can you talk about Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and the story of slow democracy there? Yeah,
it's a terrific story in Portsmouth. And like you mentioned, with schools, I mean, we're talking about our children, we're talking about our tax money, we're talking about our homes. There's nothing more divisive, really, when you start distributing those kinds of people and resources. So I'm sure many of your viewers know Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a picturesque city, 20,000 right on the New Hampshire border. So why are political scientists descending from all over the world looking at how they've dealt with problems in Portsmouth? Well, for about 20 years, Portsmouth has been addressing a lot of their key issues with a process called study circles, which is a process that's created by a group called Everyday Democracy. If your viewers want to Google it, Everyday Democracy is the group. Been working all over the U.S. And elsewhere. And this process has all the elements of slow democracy: inclusion, deliberation, and power, meaning that the process doesn't start with an answer. The answer comes out of the process. So the problem about the schools had been plaguing Portsmouth for literally 10 years at that point. And they were school redistricting. And they decided, they were pretty desperate, so they gave us study circles a try. The process starts with community organizing, basic community organizing techniques, which means beating the bushes to get diverse participation. So age diversity, gender, socioeconomics, old-timers, newcomers, you know how that can be in our in New England communities. Real diversity, race, everything. Organizers gathered as large and diverse a group as they could, knowing that each of these people had to commit to a series of, I think it was 5 or 6 meetings. And then each of those groups were divided into smaller groups of about a dozen people or so. So they had over 100 participants in this initial one, but divided into smaller groups groups to allow for better discussion. So the small groups really help build trust. In these kind of discussions, in these hard discussions, I'm sure your viewers can recognize this pattern, people want to right into the argument. They're like, yes, I'm interested, and here's my view. At the arguments pro and con. This is the slow part of slow democracy. In study circles, the participants spend the first 1 or 2 meetings just listening to each other's experiences. So they're not talking about the issue and the pros and cons. They're talking about their experiences on the topic. If it's schools, they talk about their school experiences, their kids' school experiences. If it's race, they talk about their story. And sharing those stories as neighbors and building understanding really helps to diffuse the tendency to sort of take a position and stick with our tribe. And also that initial dialogue is a really important element of inclusion because many of us are repelled by controversy. We're just tired of fighting, and we need assurances that this process is going to be civil and meaningful. And so it builds that trust. So to get on with our Portsmouth story, the groups each visited each of the schools in question. So there were field trips involved. And they met with the principals, and they did a real discovery process to learn firsthand about the key issues. So not just the problems or issues that they brought with them, but they learned about other people's views and the reality on the ground. Then came face-to-face deliberative process. And in this Portsmouth school redistricting example, they framed the issue this way. They said, what issues should the redistricting committee consider in balancing the enrollments of the school? So you notice how they framed it. They didn't say, what's the solution to the problem? Instead, they identified underlying values. So that was a critical way that they brought forward solutions. And then, of course, power was really important. That's a key to success in any of these, is that these study circles were embraced by the leadership on the school boards. In this case, they were waiting to act on the findings. So ultimately, the solutions that emerged from this school redistricting case, which included, by the way, multi-million-dollar school construction bond, were embraced by the community after so long talking about the problems. After all, they had over 100 citizen ambassadors, right, who had really explored the issues and could explain the solutions that they came up with. So in under 6 months, Portsmouth had identified a solution that had been eluding them for a decade. Ironically, by the way, slow democracy is usually faster than conventional polarized conflicts. And since then, Portsmouth used this technique in 2 cycles of their master plan, and thousands of people who used it for middle school relocation renovation issue. They've used it in race relations, affordable housing, environmental sustainability, and have even created an ongoing group of trained citizens. It's called Portsmouth Listens. And Portsmouth Listens, they serve as neutral facilitators to convene residents on local issues. They've actually inspired a number of other towns in New Hampshire to create New Hampshire Listens groups through the University of New Hampshire. So it's quite a remarkable testament to the value of this type of process.
It's really remarkable. It's a civil way to do things too, and a smart way to do things. And the approach, it seems to me, is something that would appeal to conservatives because it brings back local control. But also, progressives might like it because it's sort of a grassroots, deliberative, inclusive way to handle conversations. Also, you wrote in your book that there is one group that doesn't like it, corporate lobbyists. Can you explain why corporate lobbyists don't like slow democracy?
When we're polarized, we are easier to manipulate. When we agree locally, we people are in charge. So you can imagine that if you're a corporate lobbyist with an agenda, you love coming into a whole bunch of people who are infighting and can't get their act together. It puts the lobbyists in control when we can't name our own goals and move forward. The point of a democratic society, democracy means the people rule, right? Demos is the people. Democracy is ruling by the people. And with slow democracy, we can really take back our values.
And you and your co-author actually say, we should mention her, Woden Teachout, she's your co-author in this book. You mentioned that slow democracy is better for the local economy. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, really interesting findings on this one. A lot of researchers have noticed a link between strong citizen involvement and the economy. There was a report by the National Conference on Citizenship that showed a correlation between citizen engagement and community resilience against unemployment. The correlation might be because volunteer positions actually give us transferable skills that are useful in the economy. It might be due to people being better networked so that they could hire the right neighbor when needed. We're not totally sure about the cause and effect, but the correlation is clear. But there are other benefits too. The economy is one really important one. For civically engaged communities, these places are also more resilient in an emergency. And we are all aware of the sad rise in extreme weather emergencies, things like storms and floods and fires out west. But strong communities are where most people have experienced teamwork or have actually been a leader of some kind, a local leader. And these are places that fare better in a crisis. And then there's a third reason that is nearest and dearest to my heart. New research is showing clearly that deliberative democracy changes us individually, personally. For instance, there's solid research in people who have deliberated on juries. And this shows that this kind of empowered deliberation, where you get together and really think things through and then make a binding decision, it actually increases voting rates. People on juries tend to vote more for the rest of their lives. It often increases volunteerism. People follow the news more. Deliberation can strengthen our sense of community and respect, help us look beyond stereotypes, where you just somebody walks in the room and you're like, I know what that guy thinks. It makes us more open. And it can make us more open to new information. Getting back to that brain science, how are we going to create new solutions if we can't take in new information? A deliberative process helps us open up our minds to multiple perspectives.
It's amazing. So, devil's advocate time. Let me challenge you with a few. What do you say to people who say the community is too small for these big challenges like climate change and immigration? How can we, a little community, help with something that big?
Well, it's certainly true that we can't solve every single problem locally. On the other hand, the environmental movement has been saying for many decades, let's think locally, think globally and act locally. Coming together of these emergent processes and these emergent solutions, especially when they're informed by local wisdom, place-based wisdom. Things are different in my town than they are in yours, and certainly in my region than they are in yours. And so bringing in local wisdom can help inform us, and then we can network. We can use expertise from national experts to solve these problems, but doing so without the infighting and without the long-term, the lawsuits and all of those things. If we can come up with these solutions together, we're much more likely to have sustainable solutions.
Okay, so that was actually my other question, was about expertise. If we need expertise to solve these problems, but you're saying we can get through.
We do need experts. We absolutely need experts. And I certainly, when I say local wisdom, I don't mean that instead of, people who have been working on these issues professionally and with great research. A good deliberative process is always based on excellent, top-notch information drawing on expert opinion. But Princess Morlaquet wrote, we need experts on tap, not on top. So what that means is let's use slow democracy to engage our communities in fully exploring the issues and really naming the key questions that come up for us. And then, since residents have been involved in the process of identifying the issues and the solutions, we will all be way more responsive to the expert advice when we seek it. Because remember what happens when we hear expert advice that we don't want to hear. Our brains shut down. It's just, the problem with this is just that we're dealing with humans. If we could just get humans out of the picture, we might be able to solve it. But since we're dealing with humans, let's work with what we've got.
Wonderful. And last challenge here. What about the fact that democracy is slow? So people can point to China and say that they can make quantum leaps in their progress. For instance, they're doing a Road to Belt initiative where they're making a trade route from China right into Italy through roads. And they're doing these quantum leaps in progress because they don't have to worry about democracy and how long it takes to build consensus. What do you say to those critics?
I would argue that those kinds of solutions are usually not durable. They are not sustainable if people don't plan. And especially in a place like the United States, where we have a significant number of individualists, people who our society is really built on that idea. In order to, especially now too with the internet, where we can organize so quickly and easily, citizens in a way in the United States are worse at being governed, but better at self-government. That's a trend that has happened since the internet and given our makeup. So I would argue in democratic societies, these solutions are going to be much more sustainable with solid public engagement. And by the way, I think usually better as well. The solutions themselves are more fitting to the needs.
And you're not saying there's no place for federal government, is that right?
I couldn't understand what you just said. Sorry.
You're not saying that there's no place for federal government. You do believe in the federal government stepping in at times.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And by the way, there are some issues that really are not appropriate for a slow democracy process in terms of making policy. Civil rights, obviously, is one of them. We fought a war about that one. We absolutely need to have a standard set at the national level on civil rights. There are many environmental issues, similarly, that don't respond to local borders. So we're not saying that there's no place for federal jurisdiction at all. There's a tremendous and huge work to be done. But that work needs to be informed from the bottom up. That's how democracies, that's how federalism works, is every state is supposed to be a laboratory. And certainly within the states, those communities need to be as civically engaged as they were when Alexis de Tocqueville came here in the 1800s. We should be seeing public conversations on every square and on every corner, so that this is the demos that will inform and elect responsible leaders to our larger federal structures.
It's fabulous. Susan, where can people go to learn more about your research and work and the slow democracy movement and your book, Slow Democracy?
Yeah. Well, www.slowdemocracy.org is where we have a nice resource page. It talks about our book, but it also talks about places people can go further for more information. There's a resource page there, so slowdemocracy.org. And I would also recommend the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation website, which is ncdd.org, National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. Terrific group that just, their website is just a fire hose of information, of great processes. It's, that's where you can find out more about the study circles process we just talked about, participatory budgeting, other processes that, so that people can fit the right process to the question that they have at hand.
Well, I want to congratulate you on a fantastic book, really chock-a-block full of information. I loved it. And I want to really suggest that people might want to read it and think about it, and it's more than town meeting. We just celebrated 4th of July, and I think all Americans want to make a stronger and more sustainable democracy. And I thank you for shining a light on that, really.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And I want to thank our viewers. And I want you to all keep reaching out to your neighbors, and as always, keep looking for solutions.